Welcome to Capitol Report, a weekly discussion with your elected officials on the issues and concerns that affect you.
And good evening. Thanks as always for spending your time with us here on CMU Public TV. The state's fiscal year ends September 30th, but schools and local governments, they wrap up their years June 30 and roll over on July 1. Here on the cusp of May, as our program comes to you tonight, we'll find out how close the legislature is to their deadline of getting to a June 1st deadline for wrapping up that budget for 2014, that and much more, with my guest this week. He's Senator Mike Green from Mayville, the Republican representing the 31st District in his first Senate term. Welcome, Senator. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Let me say first to you and those joining us, we're reminding people and keeping them on track here that scheduling on the non-session days as we do and around busy lawmakers like yourselves and the schedules can be a challenge. So as we welcome in the audience and you today, it's a program they're actually catching up with a week from now as we sit down today. So given some of the timely nature of topics, we just want people to know that up front, but there is still plenty that's happening. And you said as we sat down, things that may not be resolved by the time we get to them anyway. So
we move very slow, and we should.
That being said, I did want to start with the road funding issue at this juncture, still unresolved. The first proposal would have increased the fuel tax and the vehicle registration fees, and the latest was a change, if we're understanding this correctly, to not raise the fuel tax, but rather reallocate a portion of that revenue that is collected and put it into roads rather than to schools and local governments, and in turn then raise the state sales tax to 7% to put that money back into schools and the locals. Which formula then, in your view, works? Either of these or something else?
Well, let me first say it was pretty easy for us to decide raising gas taxes at the pump, raising registration fees did not even come close to having enough votes to pass, and that was what was pushed last year. It was pushed at the legislature. We held our ground and said that's not where we want to go.
Did voters and constituents tell you that too, and calling your office and whatnot when the proposal got out there to voice their opinion on what they thought of that idea?
Very clear. Very clear.
Very clear message.
People would talk to me at church saying, don't raise my registration. Registration's tough. And to plan on bringing a lot of revenue, and you know, the Granholm administration proposed that too, so we'd already been through it once. I firmly believe that there needs to be more money for roads. If you go anywhere I go, I ask folks how many think your roads are in the best shape they should be. Every hand goes up. And then you ask the next question, how many want to pay more money to make your roads better? All the hands go down. So we gotta have a happy medium here. Now, I know the governor and Department of Transportation is proposing $1.5 billion influx starting this year and going forever. To me,
is that the price tag? $1.5 billion per year to bring us back up to where we should be, and then for the ongoing maintenance, that is indeed the figure that they think that we do need?
Yeah, and Senator Kahn from Saginaw has been on that committee, and they keep driving that, you know, we got to have 1.5 billion. I said, well, what about 750 million? No, we got to have 1.5 billion. I said, well, what is a little bit better than nothing? But no, if we don't start at 1.5 billion, then we're never going to be able to catch up, and the roads are going to keep getting worse and worse. Well, there's still many amongst us that question the governor's proposal, and I'm not saying it's a vote or not a vote. Sometimes when you try to explain it like you just did, people's eyes start going round and round, thinking, "What's going on here? You're going to stop charging tax at the pump and charge it to everybody?" And it's kind of I think the proposal is a little confusing. I've had a little trouble myself getting a hold of what they're really going to do. But why not just say, let's just raise sales tax 2 cents and be done with it? And that's, to me, if that's what the proposal was, I would think that'd be better than trying to take everything that we're paying there now and change it, take it away, and put some more in somewhere else. It's confusing to me. But I'm kind of a simple guy too, so
I would think it would be confusing to most, because it is money that if it is a fuel tax, and we know about fuel taxes going to Washington and supposedly getting the money back then to pay for, that seems to be where, if the money goes here, that's eventually where the money would be spent. That's the type of, so the fact that some of that money was going towards schools and locals, not to discount them, but I think I would wager a guess that that would be fairly new information to a lot of people joining this conversation and our conversation last week with Representative Tom Leonard. He described it in pretty simple terms, that how we are technically raising the same amount of revenue as every other state, but because of where some of that fuel tax money has gone, we have put ourselves in a constant shortfall, never spending what really MDOT and all the other experts would say that is needed for infrastructure spending. Maybe you have the answer, maybe you don't, but I'll ask it. When or how did we establish this spending priority? Not that we want to shortchange the schools, but when, do you know when that decision was made, or when we came into the formula where some of that fuel tax money was going somewhere other than directly and fully into roads and infrastructure?
Well, let me straighten it out first. There is federal tax charged at the pump. That all goes to the feds. There is state tax charged at the pumps. All goes to the state. That's clear. There's no confusion there.
Okay.
The confusion that seems to be some people are thinking now is about the sales tax that's charged at the pump. And many people may not even be aware that we charge sales tax at the pump. Sales tax at the pump is divided up just like it is like sales tax on the clothes that you buy. Or the car that you buy. It's divvied up the same way, where some of it goes to state government, some of it goes to the schools, and some of it goes a myriad of different places. So there's no confusion over the gas taxes going to the state, the gas tax going to the feds. It's the sales tax that's really not confusing, because it goes to the same place that everything else goes to.
Do other states use a similar formula? I mean,
I don't know. I have no idea.
Again, how we seem to have wound up in essentially an ongoing and increasing deficit situation. I think that's what people are trying now to figure out. I mean, we've heard for years about, well, weather conditions are unique and the soil. I've heard things for years. I remember a stretch between Bay City and Midland where an experiment was done, several different types of cement and asphalt, and how they sectioned it off, I don't remember, but you were hitting all these because they were trying to find the right formula for how we would pave the roads for something that could hold up to, we know about the fluctuating temperatures and the amount of snow to heat, and I mean, we've seen that again this spring, how rapidly things can change here. Given that, how do we build roads that can stand up to that kind of extraordinary kind of circumstance?
Yeah, and that's kind of above my pay grade too, because I can't calculate those things. We have to leave that to the experts, but I do know that we are in a little bit different position than Arizona or Texas, because we do have some massive frost laws, and we also have some large trucks that go on our highways that some other states don't allow. So there's a lot of different things and a lot of different fingers pointing at other things that causes our roads to maybe deteriorate faster. But the fact is they do, and it costs more money to keep our roads up, and the cost of fixing roads is doubling and tripling all the time. You know what asphalt's made out of, don't you? Petroleum. So when petroleum goes from $1, which it was back in the 90s, or gasoline at the pump, to almost $4 where we're at now, what does that do to the cost of blacktop? It increases it 4 times.
It goes up, yes.
That is what's causing our problems with being able to keep our roads up.
Then, I mean, you said in a conversation with Senator Kahn, what about $750 million versus one point? What is that figure? What are we currently spending? Is there a set figure? If it's not enough, and if we need this, what they are saying is the $1.5 billion to get us out of where we are now, get us to a point where we can then maintain and go forward. How much of a shortfall? Is that a known figure, or are we being asked to accept the $1.5 billion as the magic number to fix it and move ahead?
They're asking me to accept $1.5 billion, and how do we get to that point? And my question still is $1.5 billion, is it enough? And if that came from MDOT, or is $750 million, will that work for a while? And the answer that I always get back is, no, we gotta have $1.5 billion. And so if we don't get $1.5 billion, then our roads will continue to decrease. in value and worth, and so that's the magic number that they're shooting at. We have proposed, a number of us in the Senate have formed a little caucus of ways to raise money rather than just charge taxes, because, you know, with all the smart people there are in Lansing, and frankly, there's a lot of them, why do we always have to go to taxes to increase funding for things, especially for our roads? I mean, let's think out of the box a little bit. What are some other options that we could do? Well, one fellow proposed, well, how about selling advertisements on the viaducts that you go underneath, and that you could raise a pretty good amount of money there. Or what about different alternatives, like at a rest stop? How about naming a rest stop after some wealthy, like they do Comerica Park? Those are some of the ideas, but are there other ideas that we could do to raise money to fix our roads? How about cutting some of our state budget? Is that an option? Could we, and we've really been focused on doing that in this go around. We don't seem to have enough people willing to make those bigger cuts.
You're on that appropriations committee that's chaired by your colleague from Saginaw, Senator Kahn. Has that come up? Whether we're looking at how we come up with road money or anything else at this point, we've seen a beginning of a regrowth in Michigan's economy, but clearly there's still an awful lot of ongoing change. Are there still some glaring areas that some have come forward proposing cuts that are meeting with resistance, or is there that hesitation, as you put it, to think outside the box?
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of hesitation. It's hard to get legislators to cut the budget, although we have reduced our budget $1.5 billion out of $8.5 billion. Those numbers aren't exactly what I'm giving you, but we have reduced numbers like that over the last 3 years, and we're continuing to reduce because our revenue isn't as good as it was. It's better, and it's coming along better, but last year and this year are expected to be way down, but next year to start picking up a little bit. So it's really tough to make some cuts, especially with priorities that other legislators have. But I think there's room. I think we could move it, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of excitement about doing it.
The reaction from some with the schools as we come back to this idea regarding the road funding proposal, is that if that sales tax money, and I appreciate you clarifying that funding formula, if the money that from the sales tax at the pump that has been going to the schools is reallocated to put more money into the roads, then there comes the question, what happens to that source of revenue for the schools? And I don't know if what your constituents may have been telling you, or are there proposals to come back around, because education's been on a roller coaster ride in many ways since the start of the 2000s, with freezes, with actual cutbacks, with different years when there have been budget shortfalls and callbacks on funding. So recognizing, obviously, everybody, cut this, don't cut me, but in this, how much of a hit could schools take, and what might be some of the ideas to make sure that gets stabilized?
Well, by taking the sales tax and giving it to the roads, that's what brings up the question of, do we now have to backfill that somewhere around $1 billion that the schools, the revenue that's going to the schools would be shorted. And so we've got to make that up. And I think everybody in Lansing feels like we're not taking money from schools. And so that's what would come about with either a 1 or 2% increase in the sales tax.
Can they calculate that? Do they think that would make up?
Yeah, they can.
In rough estimates, to say that if we go to 7% or 8% in the sales tax, that would suffice.
Yes, but the question is, the voters have to pass it. So if we make the changes to take the money and the voters don't pass it, we're right back where we started again. So the whole key has to be, to begin with, we've got to raise the sales tax in order to make that balance. You can't just take the money and hope the sales tax passes. It's not going to be easy.
Well, once the roads dry out, then they want to start fixing them in June. Then the June 30 is when the schools want to know, because their fiscal year, that's where we started. July 1 is the start of their fiscal year.
Right.
And then this vote for the voters wouldn't even come till at least the November ballot.
Yeah,
You're not in an enviable position right now.
Right. So my guess is nothing happens this summer on roads. I would believe, unless the
in addition to what's already been set aside. I mean,
Yes,
construction will be going on, but to really get at this the 1.5 billion and the fix and the upgrade and the ongoing maintenance. We may not be able to see that.
It's not like we're not doing anything. I mean, we're close to I-75. You can see the accomplishments that were made from south of Saginaw up to north of Bay City. Go up I-75, there's some huge areas that have been improved. And you can go everywhere and find improvements. It's just there's a lot of people that feel like they're not improving fast enough. And like I told you earlier, the ones that are really getting the hits today are the cities. The cities just does not get a proportionate share to let them keep up maintaining their roads like should be. And maybe because they go slower, I don't know. I don't know what the reason is. But I do know the governor wants to rewrite Public Act 51, which would redistribute all the funding, extra funding that we get. So there's a whole lot going on. Granted, the cities need some extra money, and anybody that lives in a city, nobody will tell you, my roads are okay.
As we sit down, another education issue is coming to light with a report recently then from the Detroit News that negotiations have been underway to establish a voucher-like system for public schools being called value schools, and the approximate cost about $5,000 per year per pupil compared to the approximate $7,000 that's in the K-12 funding now. Governor Snyder is saying that the ideas have only been talked about, nothing substantial is moving forward. How much has this come to light in your office or from educators reacting to this from when that report surfaced?
I haven't heard hardly a word about it.
Okay.
We haven't talked about it in caucus. We haven't talked about we have a couple folks in my caucus, and we have 26 members that are really, really focused on education, and a couple others that are really, really focused on education funding. But this issue, I'm not sure if this proposal isn't coming from possibly the minority side that is proposing to do this, but not that it's not a good idea or a bad idea, but getting people to stand up and look at it real fast and say, we're going to do that.
In essence, there was a group that apparently has been meeting that's been talking about the idea of using more technology to offer more of an alternative. Those currently in the public education system saying that it would strip money away, they say, from the current system that we have. Others are saying that when you look at the cost of even $7,000 per pupil, can we find a more value? Can we stretch the dollar? So clearly it's going to come down to, in many ways, one group versus another potentially, and something in trying to find the best resolve and the best options for students. But it did create a ripple in the news when the Detroit News did report that, and an education summit that's going on as we sit down here on this particular Monday morning. Governor's likely to be questioned on that as well.
Stay tuned.
Since we have spent the amount of time that we did on the road funding question, I would like to shift to transportation that happens over the water. You introduced a bill that would change the funding and if I understand it, the operations oversight for 2 of the 4 bridges over the Saginaw River in Bay City. Can you tell us about how the system works right now and what your bill would do to change that?
Yeah, presently there's about, I think 9 is the number, statewide of lift bridges that different cities have to maintain because their cities are built on one side or the other. Bay City has 4, 2 of them are state trunk lines, and the other 2 are actually just city streets. But very important.
Is that the distinction then as to who pays, who has the majority of the responsibility?
Yes.
Whether or not, okay.
If it's on a state highway, state has 100% complete control. If it's on not a state highway, then that organization, whether it be a county or a city or township, would be in control of that. So my thought has been, since I've been elected, this huge amount of money to upkeep these bridges. We're talking about 2 bridges in Bay City, $500,000. And the first year I was in office, I was able to get an appropriation from the Department of Transportation to cover that for 1 year. And since then, I have been working on legislation to transfer all the bridges in the state to MDOT. To me, it's a more fair way of spreading the cost in the community because, especially Bay City, everybody in the county, from Tuscola, the Thumb, everywhere, and going north uses those bridges, but yet the cost of that bridge is still stuck on the city to maintain. And so it took me a while to really figure out the best way to fund it. Finally worked with MDOT. The director of MDOT helped me craft the legislation to where now all the bridges would go into the same pool of the other bridges that the state maintains. And in this pool, they as a group, all the bridges, which is maybe another 12, so there may be somewhere around 20. Again, don't hold me to that exact number, around the state, and then we would bid the maintenance out to a private organization, and they'd take care of all 20 of them at once. And so, again, it would save a little bit of money, but it also take the burden away from the locals to have to maintain those high cost of bridges.
So the bill's been introduced, and where is it then currently?
The Transportation Committee. I mean, there is a problem because we open up Public Act 51 and we take the funding off the top, which a couple $1 billion. I think the cost of maintaining all these bridges is around $2.5 million, which compared to $2.5 billion, it's not a lot of money, but still, opening up Public Act 51 is a problem because then everybody wants to try to make changes. That's the big funding formula for all the transportation dollars. And so introduced it maybe a month ago, but I got some pretty good feelings that we might be able to get something done.
We'll watch the progress on that then with you as it moves forward. What about the
one other thing on that too.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
If we took $500,000 off of what the city spends on the bridges, they could put another $500,000 into their city roads, because that's where the money's coming from now, which is going to improve their roads too.
All connected to where we spent much of the conversation today.
Yep.
Another good tie-in. What about the traffic on those roads, the harbors, the rivers? It gets to the subject of dredging. Money's been proposed, asked for, has been approved. Is this another fix in your mind when you look at $20 million? How far would $20 million per year go if that became a fix? Because you're dealing with this primarily in and around Bay City, and they certainly have felt the brunt of the water levels being down. Despite all of our rain, the amount of dredging that has to be done, how is that being received in terms of getting that amount of money to address some of those problems?
Okay, as far as the dredging money for around the bay and actually around the state, it was important to the administration, and they worked with us really, really close to get that money approved. They actually made the proposals of where the money should come from. They spent a lot of time actually calculating what the need was from every one of the harbors. Because of the low lake levels, we're looking at some harbors that maybe only 3 feet of water getting into the harbor, which doesn't allow many boats to get in. But we did. We got the money appropriated. We borrowed some money, took some from general fund, got the money together, and they're working on it as we speak today. This was a federal issue for a while. I guess you know that the federal government claims they own all of the bottomlands in the Great Lakes. Federal government owns it. How they ever claimed it, I'm not sure.
Senator Levin has even said with us in CMU Public Radio News several times that there's as much as $2 billion sitting in an Army Corps fund that he wanted unlocked to get at to address the problem, and that's been an ongoing fight as well.
I'm not sure that it would be unlocked. I think they want to spend it somewhere else. And there's money that's collected from, well, I won't, it gets pretty deep, that they don't spend on our Great Lakes where they should have. But I think you're going to have an ongoing problem until we get the lake levels back up. But every legislator, every member of the administration, the Department of Environmental Quality, DNR, have all been behind what we're doing with this, because it's important to Michigan. It's important to our Great Lakes. It's important to the economy of Michigan, getting boats in and out of our from the lake into where the marinas.
To try to sum it up, though, in our final minute, is and this kind of back to the road, a figure, $20 million set aside. Is that for this year and each year following a fixed amount? And do folks tell you that will get at a lot of the problem? Will that take care of only some? But as you said earlier, not down to city roads. Will it only get into certain waterways, but not through all? I mean, what's the best guesstimate as to how far we can stretch that money to?
If we do nothing with transportation funding, we're going to have an ongoing problem. But the governor does have plans to include this type of dredging, this type of maintenance for all of our harbors in with his plan for transportation funding. So if we can increase the $1.5 billion we talked about, part of that would go to the Great Lakes and to help restore the problems that we got there, help fix the problems.
Very good. That another connection that I'm glad you brought light to. That's not something that we had been made aware of, but that's good to know that this really has been a very cyclical type of discussion because all things have kind of centered around us.
If we got time, let me share something else.
Sure.
You know, agriculture is just booming in Michigan, and because of new technologies, we're increasing yields. Some will think it's doubled in the last 10 years. Corn, beans, all of our crop yields. Some say it'll double again in the next 10 years. But the problem this is causing, because we don't have any railroads left that are very good at moving a lot of commodity, everything's stuck on the roads. So most all the commodities that we ship, which because we can't ship on the Great Lakes anymore, we're shipping them all down to Toledo. All of the commodities are going to Toledo, most of them, and causing more problems with our roads. And if we double the crops, the yields again in the next 10 years, it's going to double the amount of trucks that we're using to take the crops from the Thumb and Bay City to Ohio to get on a ship to get it out. And so we're looking at some proposals to set up some shipping points around Bay City that's going to help move some of this commodity and take it off the roads.
Got to pick up this conversation. There's more to cover here than we even had time for, but we do appreciate your time in addressing as much of this as we did have time for today, and thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Our guest has been Senator Mike Green from Mayville, the Republican representing the 31st Senate District. Program airs again in our overnight schedule, and within a week we'll have it posted to our website. You can find that, the contact information for myself as host and producer, for any feedback on the program, for Chris Ogazali and all of our crew. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, and we'll talk again.
You've been watching Capitol Report. Join us again as your elected officials speak to your concerns on current issues.